I want to start by thanking everyone for the very nice birthday wishes, the cakes last week at the annual meeting, and many cards. This was one of those zero birthdays when you start thinking about what it means to get older. I know some of you are, ahead of me a little ways in that journey. And age is an interesting prospect. I have spent most of my ministry with older people. One of the reasons I love being an Episcopalian is that I can be 60 years old and still be one of the younger people in the church. It's great. Feel young at heart. But even as a 20-something priest, I spent a lot of time with older people. I did services in nursing homes and assisted living facilities and so forth. And I've watched people age. I watched my parents go through their final years in different ways, dealing with, sadly, dementia of a couple different types and physical stresses. And I've watched basically two paths that people take. One path as we get older is we kind of dwell in the past, and everything today seems worse than it was in the good old days. Maybe you go through this every once in a while. You think, kids today, ... right? Isn't it? It's just terrible how things used to be so much better. And that can lead to a kind of negativity of spirit, right? We can get kind of stuck in romanticizing the past when we were young and vigorous, and then looking at today with the sense of almost despair. There's a kind of anger or despondency that can happen, a depression that can sink in. But I've also seen people age in a very different way. Not that they don't have bad days, not that they don't have bad challenges as they age, but they seem to take their experience of the past, and it allows them to put the current challenges in perspective. They don't tend to get so upset about the little things today because they've been through it all before, right? They know that, hey, we've been through this, we're going to make it, things are better. In fact, there were several studies that showed a happiness curve. Basically, you start off, if you're blessed to live in a happy family, you start off very happy as a child, and then your happiness decreases every year as you get older and older until when you're in your, let's say, 40s, mid-40s, you kind of hit the low point for some reason, right? You're, I guess, busy with work and family, sandwich generation kind of stuff. But then something happens. As you go past that, the happiness curve bends for many people upward. Because, again, I think you're not so upset about you don't sweat the small stuff anymore. You're not so concerned about what other people think, right? How oppressive that is when you're younger. Everyone's looking at me, they're judging me. You get to a certain age and you go, who cares, right? Who cares? So I love that option. I want option B as I get older. I want the option of embracing the rest of my life. My dad he's a football player. He loved football metaphors. He said, I look at it as quarters. He said, as he got to the end of his life, I'm in the fourth quarter. And he said, the fourth quarter is exciting, right? In football, that's when all the action happens. And he was someone who embraced life, was always looking for new relationships. He had younger friends. He liked trying new things right up to the end. And that's kind of how I want to be. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because our gospel today gives us some wonderful examples of old people in the Bible, right? Most people in the Bible didn't live very long. The life expectancy for most of human history was somewhere in the 30s or 40s, right? It's only a very recent thing that we live into our 80s and 90s and beyond. But in today's gospel, we meet a woman who is 84. Now, you probably read that and went, 84? Gosh, that's nothing. In those days, that was a big deal. That was extreme old age. Think 120 in today's terms. She was old. And what kind of old person was she? Was she angry? Was she bitter? Was she depressed? No. She was someone who had been through trials and tribulations and come out the other side with an amazing sense of faith. She had lost her husband very young, 7 years of marriage, and then lived as a widow. Widows had a rough time in the ancient world. There was no social security. There was no social safety net. They were dependent on their family. If they had no family, they had nothing. It seems that she was maybe supported by the temple. She lived there day and night, it says, prayed and fasted and was there all the time. And in her life, she had practiced the habit of faith day after day, year after year. And that enabled her to see clearly when Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to the temple for this ritual, 40 days after the birth, you would have the presentation of the child. And it was also the time when Mary was purified after her childbirth. There was a whole Jewish tradition of that. And they were just one of many families doing this. They were not remarkable in any way. But Anna could see something special. She saw that this was the promised Messiah. And she wasn't alone. There was another old person there. We think old, Simeon, who had been promised by God that he would not die until he saw the Lord's Messiah. So he came, prompted by the Spirit, to the temple that day, and he saw Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and he made a beeline over there, and he grabbed Jesus from Mary. You can imagine her going, "Who the heck are you?" He takes the baby, and he holds Jesus up, and he sings this beautiful song. "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people." And then he goes on. This is not just about the salvation of the Jews, not just the redemption of Jerusalem or Israel. This child is a light to enlighten the Gentiles. This salvation is for everybody. I think about Simeon and Anna because they had been through a lot. By the time they saw Jesus in the temple in their old age, they had lived through a lot of suffering in Jerusalem. In the year 63, when they were very young, 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey conquered Jerusalem. Before that, Jerusalem was conquered by the Greek and Macedonian empires. There was a brief window of opportunity when the Maccabees led an uprising, and there was a brief moment of Jewish independence. But for all of their lives and all of the history that they had been taught, they were an oppressed people in a conquered land, living under the heel of the oppressive Roman Empire, paying taxes to faraway Rome with no representation of any kind. There was no Tea Party, nothing to get them out of that, right? No Boston Harbor they had to just live with this oppressive regime. And yet, they did not somehow, despite generations of oppression and their whole lifetime of living with the Roman occupation, they did not lose hope. They saw that God was still active and working. And then they saw Jesus in the temple, and life changed for them forever. I think the challenge we have as Christians, as people, is to take option B as we look at our lives and the options we have for how we're going to approach whatever quarter of life we're in, whether it's the first quarter or the second quarter or the third quarter, or for many of us, the fourth quarter. How are we going to live? Are we going to live with despair and anger, thinking back to the good old days and bemoaning the state of the world? Or are we going to look to the future with hope and optimism and faith, aware that God is present and active? Because you know what? We've been through some stuff too in our world. I was looking at some things that kind of blew my mind this week. Last week, January 27th, was Holocaust Remembrance Day. In 1945, on January 27th, the Red Army liberated Auschwitz death camp. And so that became a celebration, a remembrance every year for people to remember that day. There are still tens of thousands, not many, shrinking every year, but tens of thousands of survivors of the Holocaust. Some of them were physically able to go to Auschwitz this year to honor that terrible and wonderful, momentous moment. This is not something, I think sometimes we study history, it's like these, sepia-toned images in our textbooks. This is in human living memory. There are real people who are alive today who were soldiers in World War II and liberated those camps. Real people today who were in those camps and who lost all of their belongings, all of their loved ones. Somehow that is living memory, and we don't want to go back. That memory is important for us to be able to approach the future in a different way. I was thinking about another person, Ruby Bridges. I don't know if you know Ruby Bridges. She was the little girl in the picture in Louisiana, the first African-American child to go to an all-white school in that town in Louisiana. And she's 70 years old this year. This is not ancient history. This is living memory. And we don't want to go back. It seems shocking that this is so recent, that desegregation is such a moment that's still so present, so near to us in history. And it's by remembering, not dwelling in the past, but by remembering that hopefully we have the opportunity to make changes and to look forward with hope and faith, to make the changes, to bring about the kingdom of God that God so desires for us to live into. Today we are celebrating Candlemas. Candlemas is a wonderful connection to this day, and it's because of Simeon's hymn when he said that this Jesus would be a light to enlighten the nations. A pope decided that's a great day to bless candles, right? Because candles are the symbol of the light of Christ. And so we've blessed our altar candles, and we also blessed some little tea lights. And I hope that you'll take one home today with you and light it at your home as a symbol of the light of Christ. And as you light it, I hope you'll also think and ask yourself, what would it look like for me, for us, to be a light to the nations right now? What would it look like for us to bear witness to the hope in the midst of a world which is very confusing, very challenging, very conflicted, very scary in a lot of ways? The world of AI and trade wars and conflicts of all kinds. How can I, in this moment, reflect and share the light of Christ? How can I learn from the experience of the past to be able to move forward with love and faith and hope, like Simeon and like Anna, and like the saints of the church throughout their generations who have done their part to pass that light forward? I want to close with one of my favorite images. Every Christmas Eve, we hold our little taper lights, right? And one of my favorite parts of that service, I know you all love singing Silent Night, I love that too, but right before Silent Night is maybe my favorite part, because the acolytes take the light from the altar, and what do? They pass it to the end of the aisle, and each of us passes that light on to the next person. And suddenly, the whole church is full of the beautiful candlelight of Christmas Eve. I hope that we can be that light in a world that's full of darkness, that we can take our little candle and pass that light on to our friends and family, to our neighbors, to strangers, and approach whatever quarter we're in with faith and with love and with hope. Amen.